Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this last session of day one at Independent Hotel Show. Can everybody hear me that's standing at the back? Good, great, thank you. So I'm going to ask my panel today to introduce themselves first, and then we will crack on with the discussion. So Kalindi, can I hand over to you first?
Thanks, Petra. Can you all hear me? Because I can't hear myself. I can now. I'm Kalindi. I'm Chief Exec for Pride of Britain Hotels. We're a marketing consortium for independent luxury hotels all across the country. Over to you, David.
Afternoon. My name's David. I am Head of Marketing for AB Hotels. Been with AB Hotels for about 5 years, but spent about 18 years in the industry. Mark?
And I'm Mark Radda. I'm a brand strategist. I've been doing this for over 30 years, 10 years at Wolf Olins, where I did things like the London 2012 Olympics, and the last 15 years with my own company, where I've had things ranging from hotels, big and small, through to Williams F1, through to PwC, through to all sorts of things. It's great fun.
Okay, and I'm Petra Clayton. I'm CEO of Custard and also the past chair of Hotel Marketing Association. So, good afternoon. We have got a real meaty topic. I think we all want to know how to stand out, to sell out, and I think we've got an incredible panel here because we've got people from different corners of the industry, and we're hopefully going to give you as much practical advice as well as maybe a few reminders to go back to basics. So with that, one of my first questions is around standing out. And getting back to basics, because there's so much competition in the industry right now. We're all talking sometimes the same messages. It's really hard to stand out from your competitors. So I guess, David, I'll come to you as the hotel.
I thought you might.
You thought I might? Yeah, I said I'd pick on you. Are hotels doing enough with their marketing? If we're talking going back to basics, are we actually doing enough? We've learned a huge amount from the pandemic. Are we doing enough as an industry?
It's a really interesting one. I think that from a marketeer's point of view, I think over the last 2 years, we've had, I'm going to say it's been quite an easy ride for marketing for our sort of hotels. The demand has been high. There's been staycations, interest in the market, and I think it's been a little while since we have really had to fight for our business, and I think where the period we're going into now, I think we're really going to have to start fighting for every piece of business, and that you have to get back to basics and just kind of relook at everything you're doing.
Okay, and Kalindi, obviously you represent a lot of luxury hotels in the UK. Do you think that corner of the market is doing enough with their marketing?
I think the most refreshing change in marketing over the last couple of years has been that in the past it was often product-driven marketing. We often saw the product at the face of everything, you know, the room, the restaurant, the menu. But it's really refreshing to see that going forward, and currently we're seeing a lot of brands now talking about the experience. So really focusing on the human element, actually how are you going to feel at the end of your stay, your dining experience. And so, yes, I think the biggest shift that hotels are finally making is experience and emotion-driven marketing.
Okay, that's good. And you mentioned product orientation versus consumer. Now, Mark, obviously, as our brand expert, we talk a lot really about understanding why we do what we do and who we do it for. How does a hotel go about, because very, very busy, trying to get the market in, as David said, but how do we go about saying, hang on, who are we actually trying to get through the door? And can we refine that through analysing our brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think hotel brands are probably the most complicated brands I work with because there are so many of them and it's all about the experience. And I think part of the problem is, if you think back to actually what a brand has to do, when a brand is about helping people make a choice, when you've got loads and loads and loads to choose from, it's really, really hard to differentiate. So I think really the first thing you've got to do is go back to basics, and the first thing you've got to do is think, what is our hotel for? You know, is our hotel a stop overnight? Is our hotel a gateway to a city? Is our hotel a culinary experience? Is our hotel something different? So actually define what your hotel exists to do before you start thinking about your brands, because that really helps shape the brands that you then create.
And when we talk about brand, obviously one of the biggest competitor landscapes is destination. So if you're in the Cotswolds or if you're in Bath or Brighton, you're competing obviously with a lot of people. How much should hotels be doing themselves to really boost that destination? I mean, David, you've worked with hotels that are very much about destination. How much should we be putting in towards that destination marketing?
I think it's key. And I think it's the more that the hotels can do with their destinations, especially those that are kind of outside of the Cotswolds and you know, Manchester and all, you know, Edinburgh. When you've got a smaller destination, possibly a lesser known destination, the hotels have to work harder to pull in those elements from their destination to make themselves more attractive to the consumer. And when you do that well, what you enable the guest to do is to find another reason to stay or a reason to stay another night. So then you're building the business that you're getting from that guest. And there's lots of different ways to kind of market yourself and align yourself with your destination. It doesn't have to be all-encompassing. It just needs to be something where you're listing what's going on in the area on the website, just so you look like you are entwined with the area that you are positioned in. And you need to work with the area that you're in everything you do. It's not just events, but it's the food that's being sourced. It's, you know, where the products come from. It's really, really important to do that as well as you can.
And are you finding that people are travelling further now to get to the hotel? Is that something that we're now saying a destination is 5-6 hours, or is it 2-3 hours? Is that something you've experienced with Stockwell House?
Yeah, I don't think people are travelling further, but they are finding other reasons to come. And they are extending their stay a little bit. So whilst they may be coming from and for Stockwell House, it's about an hour and a half to 2 hours away. So they're still sort of still coming, but they are staying longer, and they are making a point of having the hotel as a base to explore local areas. Whereas previously it was one night, it was bed, breakfast, dinner, and gone.
And obviously, sorry, I'm going to focus on you for a little bit. So you've launched a restaurant. So this is now the second restaurant within the hotel. And is that part of making that experience work, that people can stay for 2 nights? So we're seeing people wanting to stay on site more? Because we're kind of doing two things, aren't we? We're promoting the destination, but equally we're saying, but we need you to stay in the hotel. Yeah,
and you've got to make it attractive to do both. So yeah, we had 2 hotels. No, we didn't. We had 2 restaurants in a hotel. We had the Brasserie, which is our standard restaurant, and then we had, like many hotels, we had a kind of a fine dining second option restaurant, which people were kind of coming to us less and less, and we had a kind of a gut feeling that actually it wasn't what people wanted to do when they were at the hotel. That fine dining experience wasn't, certainly for our guests, it wasn't what they were after, and they were then going into St Albans for the second night. So we sent out a survey to all our past diners, residential and non-residential, and just asked them what they do for dining, not only at Stockwell House, but other hotels, where they like to eat when they go out, and what they're looking for. Because we assume that what we've got serves a purpose, because it always has done, but actually the landscape's changing.
And it's interesting to say about the landscape, and it is this, the audience is changing. And Kalindi, you must have seen this with Pride of Britain Hotels, but also in your previous career, that do we know enough about our audience? So we actually, Mark mentioned it earlier about understanding who you are and what you do, but it's quite scary to change audience or to adapt. So what would your advice be, kind of what every hotel should be doing to channel to a specific audience? Should they be more niche, or are we going for everyone?
I think you need to own what your focus is, but before doing any of that, the most important thing is to go back to basics, is to really look deep within to see, well, actually, if this is what I currently do, what do my guests like about what I currently do? What resonates with my audience? So as a brand, we've just gone through this big process ourselves. We're about to change the direction of quite a lot of our marketing. We're launching a new website. But before any of that, we needed to look within to see, well, actually, we've built brand equity for 40 years. What is it about our brand that our guests actually love? And we're in a very lucky space in marketing today where we have access to so much about our guests. You know, years ago, when we used to write marketing plans, you know, there wasn't, I won't say it was guesswork, but a lot of it was based on this is what we can offer, and so we're going to promote it. Whereas today we can say, this is what we want to promote, but actually, out of the 5 USPs I've got, 3 are really resonating with my guest, and so I want to shout about that at this time of the day with this type of person. So I think marketing's become really clever. A lot of the guesswork's gone, but still, absolutely, we should focus and own what our strengths are, and focus on that.
And Mark, you must have seen that where you take a brand from one position to another. That must be heavily driven by the audience that they're trying to capture.
It is. I mean, it's actually a balance. So you need to understand your audience. You need to understand what they want and what they value. But at the same time, I think it's important to have a clear idea of where you're going as a hotel, to have a really clear vision. And it's a balance between the two things. And you really have to build your brand around both of those.
And we talked obviously previously, and there are lots of tools that we can use to try to identify. As you said, we've got a huge amount of data. Are there other tools that you can recommend, putting you all on the spot, that people should be using or looking at, whether it's externally or internally? What are the kind of key tools that people should be making sure that they're checking to understand their business and the user?
Sure. I think let's think about who we are today in the room. We are independent hotels, right? So as an independent hotel, your biggest source of business would be your website. Well, it should be your website. And if that's the case, we should know everything around that. So actually, there's so much free resource out there. So Google Analytics should almost be a Bible for a marketeer. You know, we look at it weekly. I'm a bit of a nerd with it, maybe daily. You know, so really looking at that's free. You get so much information. And then looking at all your social platforms. Every social platform has free analytic tools available. And it's scary how much information we can get about our guests, or our audience rather. And then actually we should have a tailored approach for each platform. So I would say if you haven't got the budget, you don't want to spend on external tools, then Google Analytics and each of the free platform software is a great start. I also there's a free version of SEMrush, that's quite good as well. You know, you can subscribe for a paid version, but that's also good. So I'd say, let's see, it's our website that's most important, so yeah.
That's true. Would you agree with that, Mark?
I do, and I also use qualitative stuff, so I find TripAdvisor is a great way. You obviously have to take it with a pinch of salt, but it's a great way of seeing what people really value about your hotel, and quite often you can pick up themes, the reasons why people are staying, so that's a really useful one. And then for staff, Glassdoor is always a good way to see how staff see you, because you're challenging to recruit staff, and if you understand how staff see you and how they're talking about you and how you can either fix that or build on it, that's really important as well. So those qualitative things I find really useful when building a brand.
And just digging a bit deeper, what kind of things should we know about that audience? So you mentioned, maybe feedback, things they love about you. Are we moving away now from demographics and more to behavioural traits? So is that something it's harder to obviously analyse, but if we're talking about experience, David, is that something you looked at particularly with the restaurant?
Yeah, I do think that demographics still plays a strong part in what we need to analyse and look at. Just going back slightly to the previous section, the other tool that we find invaluable is the data you get from your booking engine. So you've got analytics, which is great, but the other side of that, when actually people are making transactions on your website and booking their hotel stays and whatever else they book, there's a separate amount of data that can be mined from that side of things. And again, it's free, it's part of your booking engine, so please use that. I think in terms of the behavioural side of it, everything you use formulates a behaviour, and you can't just use one. But I do think demographics are still important in terms of, the people that are coming, because then that formulates how they like to book and what platforms they're likely to use, where they're likely to do their research before they make the booking, and what other platforms are influencing their decisions. So it's a classic answer, but it's a little bit of everything to build a picture of your guests.
So is marketing for hotels becoming more scientific or more analytical, as it should be and was many years ago? We've kind of gone from creative now to back to what do we do, why do we do it, and who's going to care? Are we seeing that as a further shift and will continue because of the data?
I think so. And again, that will then be part of your strategy to work out what your creative is. Obviously creative is extremely important, but before you can make your next campaign or look at what you're doing for the next year, you need to know where your starting point is, and who you're trying to target.
And when we talk about who we're going to target, obviously loyalty is a big part. We could probably have a whole session on loyalty, but and I think particularly maybe with Pride of Britain that if you're an independent hotel, you want to get repeat bookings, but are we seeing a further shift in the loyalty side, ignoring schemes and rewards, but are we seeing people just saying, actually, I want change, I want difference? Is that a market that we need to be aware of?
Well, we see huge loyalty at Pride of Britain hotels. Our email marketing opening rates, for example, are just off the charts. So we do have a loyal following. Our hotels welcome a lot of guests who come back time and time again. But I think it sort of goes back to the point we were talking about earlier, which is I think people will be loyal if it's a brand that they feel an affinity towards, if it's aspirational, they can relate to, if we're doing things the right way. I also feel that as marketers, if we're not listening to the trends or demographics and what our guests want from us, then it's lazy marketing, really, with the amount of data we have. It's like if you've got a friend and you know they're not a morning person, but you only call them first thing in the morning, you're going to annoy them. It's the same thing. So, I think let's use this data, let's be sensitive, and let's be, we're dealing with humans here. We want to market so our brand resonates with them and hence creates loyalty.
And Mark, do you have anything to say? I saw you nodding on loyalty.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about it is you've got to remember that your customers are as much as your marketing team as your internal marketing team, because they're communicating the whole time about your brand and about your hotel. And I think we can use that, give people the opportunity to communicate about things that they've experienced and use them as a marketing tool.
And we talked about planning. And one of the things that I know we've had discussions about is that we don't plan enough, and marketers and hotels specifically need to do a lot more planning, a lot more strategy. What do you see happening in 2023, crystal ball moment, but for marketing as a landscape for the hotel industry? What do you see the key differences are going to be, or what we need to really focus on? David, do you want to start with that?
It's a real difficult question, isn't it? I'm glad you came to me. It's a difficult one because I think we are, as I said before, we are looking at 2023 as being a really tough year for marketing, for hotels in general. And that often leads to the conversation of there's no point in planning. We don't know what's going on. We don't know where we're going to be next week, let alone in 6 weeks, 3 months' time. So why are we bothering? But it's important to have that structure in place regardless, so you know your points of activity, even if the message and the focus changes from week to week. If you don't have that initial structure, you've got nothing to hang the conversation on about what you actually do going forward.
So how can you have that agility structured into your business? What creates that level of agility for you?
It's reacting to what's going on. As Mark said, looking at what your customers are saying, looking at the feedback you're getting. You get a good idea of it day to day anyway, but there are so many tools that you can just get that consumer confidence or general kind of feedback on where things are going. And you look at trends. You look at trends and you react to them. But you can do that in a flexible way, but you must have that structure in place
Yep.
to hang those discussions on.
And Kalindi, you've obviously worked with lots of hotels. How much input does marketing need to have back to the business of the operations side? Because, of course, if we're trying to be agile and change and follow the trends, it has to all come from marketing, doesn't it?
That's the big debate, isn't it? Operations versus marketing. I think ultimately, I'm a strong believer, particularly with the type of hotels that I've always worked with, which is small independent hotels. We're too small to have too many different ways and directions to go in. So I always feel we should all be working together. We should have one big plan. Operations must sit with marketing. And yes, having an annual marketing plan is absolutely essential. It's a guide, but it's got to be agile, it's got to be adaptive, it's got to respond to changing trends, to changing conditions within a hotel, whether it's staffing challenges. You know, it's like little examples. You know, this year, particularly in marketing, it's been quite challenging. We've had to adapt to a lot of big negative news. And so, for instance, if we're hearing about the government, or we're hearing in the media all about, the cost of our utilities going up, and that's a big challenge for hotels and guests. People are worried about it, but we're out there sending out very extravagant posts and so on. That's not very sensitive. So actually, we've got to be sensitive to both the mood of the country, the region. So marketing's always got to be agile, both within the business and, of course, at a macro level.
And you've raised a really interesting point there, because a lot of this is about pricing, and the way to stand out is beyond pricing, because we don't want the market to be driven down by everyone undercutting each other. So how do we stand out but still keep that operational revenue, profitability, hopefully, and positioning? Mark, you must have worked a lot around pricing and brand, and how do you manage that?
I think you have to be clear about what price point you're after, and I think one of the things that you must do is build a brand that supports that. And
at the right audience.
Yes, exactly.
That you're going for a lucrative audience. And with pricing, as we're talking money, marketing budgets. How do you set your marketing budget, David?
Well, I would say
Have you set your marketing budget, David?
I would say certainly we've actually just gone through this process at Saltwell, and I'm pleased to say that we're out the other side. I think the key thing is to keep your marketing budget, fight for your marketing budget. The temptation is to cut marketing because there's other expenses that are take priority. And it is difficult when you're sat in the marketing chair with the budget to really fight for it. But again, it comes back to knowing your data, knowing how marketing works for you and the hotels. What's the most cost-effective form of marketing? And so you work backwards. You work out how many people you want to try and target, what areas of the business, how you're going to do that, and then you have to put the numbers in place. It's tough, and it's going to be tougher still, but please don't cut your marketing budget.
I'm sure you'd agree with that, Kalindi.
I think 2023 is going to be the year that marketing's going to come into its own, because everybody needs to fight for that business, as you said earlier. We need to stand out. But if you are setting your budget right now, and a lot of hotels are setting their budget right now, what I would say is definitely please measure your past activities. Don't just do stuff because you've always done it. And the biggest, if there was one takeaway for a marketing budget, what I would say is, I often see, obviously not our hotels, but just generally speaking, I often see a lot of spend on marketing, but perhaps the website isn't optimized. And what I would say is, if ultimately everything we're doing is to drive traffic to the website, I'd rather, if it was me and my hotel, really invest in sorting my website out first, because it's not going to convert no matter how much you spend on everything else. And once I fix that piece of the puzzle, then I'd go and market to drive traffic to it.
Okay, and there's definitely some website companies here today, so if you're looking to invest. So you mentioned measurement, and that must be, particularly David, if you've just gone through this round, must be the toughest thing is you've got to say, what is that going to deliver?
Yeah.
Because you've worked backwards and then now we're working forwards again. Realistically, I can't probably ask you this, but how do you measure? What is the measurement? Is it stays? Is it lucrative audience? Is it brand awareness? What are you using to measure?
The ultimate goal is obviously hotel stays and revenue, or people going to the spa, but it comes down to revenue. Everything boils down to revenue. So when we've just gone through this process, the main part of that is to look at where you think those people are going to be looking, buying, making their decisions. Look at that kind of environment as a whole, and work out how much of that is going to be digital, how much of that is going to be print, for example, how much of that is going to be spent on websites or new photography or social or whatever, and work out for each individual market what's the best platform and where you put most of that section of the marketing budget. Because let's not forget, your marketing budget will not be split just between hotel, but it'll be, there's spa, there's restaurant, there's the hotel itself, and they all have different needs for attracting those customers, and that budget is then also split depending on that particular kind of guest.
And you mentioned, obviously, website, you mentioned photography, and I had that down as one of our discussion points, that can you put a figure on it? But we've talked about photography. How often should you be refreshing your imagery throughout the year? Mark, do you want to take that? Because that's a big part of brand, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the thing about imagery is that it's not something you can economize on. Having fantastic images is so important. I remember working with one client where they showed me some photographs they'd taken of their swimming pool, and it was a picture of a swimming pool. It was fine, but it was a picture of a swimming pool. Their brand was all about an oasis for the well-travelled. We got a much more expensive, much more qualified photographer in. She took this beautiful atmospheric shot of that pool, and it reinforced what that brand was about. So I think the first thing you need to do is make sure you've got a portfolio of fantastic images that tie in with how you want your brand to be positioned. Then I think you should update those on a regular basis, maybe every 6 months or so. Just add a few to that portfolio so that you're constantly refreshing it. You're not rolling out the same old images time and time again. But it's so important to get those images right to start with.
And this is a question for the whole panel. How do you make your images stand out? Because obviously you're trying to connect them to your brand and your business and your audience, but I think we've all seen the same shots from lots of hotels, and it's very difficult, isn't it, to make your spa or your restaurant stand out. So how do you change that photography brief to spark something different? Is that something you've seen, Mark?
It is. A spa. How many times have you seen a picture of a woman lying down with some stones on her back? That's a spa shot. So it's just saying we've got a spa, and this is a typical spa shot. What you've got to do is think about what it is you're trying to create emotionally. How do you want people to feel when they see that photograph? And getting a good photographer to do that is essential. So if you haven't defined emotionally what you want those photographs to represent, then you can't brief a photographer properly. So that's why it's so important to have that brand defined to start with, I think.
And David, you must have done that with the restaurant recently.
Yeah, the restaurant and the spa before that. It's coming back to Mark's point, it's so important to get a good photographer, but also remembering that the thing about photography is that it's such a personal thing. So it's really important to get a photographer you get on with, but you let them take the shots they think they want to take. Because I'm guilty of it as much as anyone. Can we just move that a little? What about if we... And these are professionals. They do it day in, day out. They create some amazing shots because they would have created amazing shots because that's what you've seen to get them in the first place. So give them a bit of free rein to look at your product in a different light, because you're seeing the same thing every day, and that's why you get stuck often in taking the same photos from the same angles of the same things, but with a different pot of flowers on the table or something. So you know, obviously they've got to be well briefed. You need to know what you want out of the photo shoot, but give them a little bit of creativity.
There's also something about remembering your price point as well, because I remember one photo shoot where there's some lovely photographs of a table with some bottles of Coke and some gin and tonics and some chips. I mean, that's not your price point. It's a very nice, you know, it'd be great for a pub, but it's not you. So you've got to remember, because the photographer doesn't know what your price point is and what you're trying to create. So you've got to make sure that that brief is absolutely on it.
And obviously, we've got a lot to cover in this short period of time, so I don't want to open up a huge discussion around it. But social media is one of those biggest areas of something visual that expresses the right photography, creates that emotional connection. Kalindi, you must have some tips of kind of how should hotels, or how the best ones making it work, how should we be approaching social media?
So photography is a topic I'm slightly obsessed about, or lack of sometimes. So I think going back to when we're talking about photography, because it ties in with what you've just mentioned, is I think the approach for photography for social has to be quite different to your big photo shoot that you do for your website. Obviously, you need far more high resolution for your website than you do for social. I'm sure you all know that. And the frequency of what we need for social now is constant. So we need this on a daily basis. And how do you stand out? I think that's, again, going back to the audience, because when you're planning your social posts and you're planning what you're talking about, I think that's where you can bring in a bit more personality. The key thing, though, I feel for social is really using each platform for its own purpose. A lot of hotels are guilty of putting the same photo and same post blanketed across every single platform. That's not the point of it. You're not giving a reason for guests to follow you or your audience to follow you on multiple platforms if you post the same stuff everywhere. So actually, you know, make a strategy per platform, see what you want to get out of it.
Okay. David, would you agree?
Yeah,
I mean, social media must be a big part of Spa.
Absolutely, and I agree with everything you said. The only thing I would say that we found is that peppering the social media feed with some kind of not quite back of house, but people-related shots that are kind of behind the curtain a bit. Certainly in the kitchen, people love that sort of thing, and actually that comes back to the personality of the hotel and the brand, and sometimes that can do more for you than the perfectly laid out bed with, you know, all the things we all put in these shots. Some of those kind of more real, more authentic photos resonate much more with the end user than anything you could put on stage.
No, that's true. And obviously there is a surge now in using influencers to create that social content and share those experiences. It's something some hotels are yet to adopt or a little bit nervous. Have any of you got, or I suppose Kalindi and David, have you got tips in terms of how to approach that influencer market, and again, maybe that measurement and an impact it has?
Sure. I think people often get nervous around it because they hear horror stories or things where things have perhaps gone wrong. I would approach it like any media visit, you know, in that have a conversation, have a clear conversation about what you want to get out of it, delve deep into the influencers following and the reason or what about the following is of interest to their guests, because it may be that it's, you know, that they've got a lot of followers, but actually perhaps the interest is very different to what you're trying to attract for your property. So the first thing is I go really deep into that influencers following and really see actually where's the demographic, where are they based, what else interests them, before I negotiate. And then, yes, have a conversation, get photographs out of them. And obviously they're of different levels. There will be those that you need to pay for. There's some where you can get away with the barter. And don't be afraid of them. You know, have that open conversation.
Just to add to that, I would say don't be afraid to say no as well.
Yes, that too.
Somebody connects to you and sort of says, no, I'd like to stay in this. I've got however many hundreds of thousand followers. And you can get into a stage where you think, probably should. But when you look into it, you think, actually, you should be able to go back and say, actually, really sorry, but you're not right for what we're trying to do right now. And you know, it come back to having that conversation and working out what you want to get from it.
So we're cramming everything in here, doing a light touch on everything. So just going to hand over to the audience. If anyone has any very specific questions, you can see we've got an incredible panel of experts that can talk from everything from social media to influencers to website and everything beyond. Any questions from anyone that they'd like to pose to the panel? Yes, there's a microphone just coming to you. If you could just let us know where you're from.
I'm not from a hotel, but post-hotel background. This is for you hoteliers out there. Do you have any tips on being authentic as a brand? Because we all, well, I used to, look at other brands for inspiration, but then we all tie into the same pouring of the syrup and the pouring of the gin. Any tips on being authentic as a brand?
Mark, that's probably aimed at you.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing about being authentic is making sure that that you know your audience and you also know the area you're in. I mean, I had an example of one hotel that has changed in Cambridge, so I'm not insulting anybody. They established this hotel where their rooms had different levels that they thought were based on Cambridge academics. So their opening level room was freshmen, and then it went to Don, and then it went to something else. So I contacted them and said, we don't have freshmen in Cambridge, it's freshers. We don't have Dons so much, that's more Oxford than Cambridge, so we normally had fellows. And what they'd done in trying to be authentic, without actually knowing enough about the place, was that they'd opened themselves to ridicule. So I think it's really important, to be authentic, you have to know a place. So that's one thing about authenticity that I think is so important.
And then that must also come from the fact that you know why you do what you do and why you're a hotelier and who you're targeting,
Yeah.
and that expertise and experience that you're bringing. So that must all help create
Yes,
that authenticity rather than following what somebody else is doing.
Yes.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Just one from the gentleman at the back. There's a microphone on its way to you.
Hello there. It's so often that I look at great websites. Sorry, I'm John Hussain from Barcelona Group. We're a restaurant, bar, and a small hotel organisation. And I look at great websites, communication on the phone's great, and so on. And I get to the reception, and actually it's a very different experience of the individuals who are dealing with me. And I feel, I'd like your comments on it, getting the staff on board with you as marketeers are trying to achieve. Because so often, especially the bigger the company, the more disappointing is that communication.
That's a great question. Kalindi, do you want to take that?
We talk about this all the time. It's the equivalent of the virtual lobby and the actual lobby, 100%. They've got to sit together. And actually, I find, and I've done this with quite a few hotels where we've worked on websites in the past, a good website company really takes time to come and get to know your product beyond just the meetings with the marketing team. They will sit in your lobby, they will talk to your team and really get a sense of place. And actually that's what needs to be created virtually, because the two have to sit together. And equally, they can't be, one, as you said, cannot be better than the other. They should be authentically equivalent. And that's another point to authenticity, is be real with your product.
Yeah, and I think honesty is an important part of that. You shouldn't get your website to con people about the experience that they're going to have. I remember going to a place where beautiful picture of the swimming pool on their beach on the website. Went to the beach and it was about the same width as the picture on the website. It was just tiny. And I felt conned straight away, and my perception of that hotel just went like that. So you've got to be realistic. If something's not great, then you don't have to say it's not great, but don't pretend it's something it's not.
Yeah. Avoid the desperation almost, isn't it? So thank you for that question. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, just at the back.
The question you love. Just with all that great experience up there, I just wondered, have you got any sort of thoughts for the future, next trends, something we should consider and look forward with?
David?
I mean, honestly,
Thank me later.
thoughts on trends. Not especially, if I'm being honest, because I don't know what's around the corner. What I would say, and it comes back to points that we've we've made throughout this session is talk to your customers. You know, there's SurveyMonkey that you can use quite easily to talk to your customers and find out what they want, find out what they think the next trends are, find out if your product is still fit for purpose, find out if they're still coming to you for the same reasons they always did. And if they don't, or if they're not and they want something else, then you need to look at that in alignment with what you do going forward. I think one of the most underused resources we have are the customers that we've been welcoming to our hotels for many, many years. You know, they will be the ones that will have ideas on what they want to do, and they will then formulate those next trends. But do I know what's coming up? No, sorry.
Kalindi, you must have the answer.
Well, there's so many trends hitting us, whether it's, I'm most excited about the technological trends, but I think one of the things is that guests are expecting to almost have a virtual experience before they arrive now. And with video taking off as much as it has now, and we all have been talking about this for a while, that video's exploded, right now we're at a stage where video is super important for social particularly, but the next thing's actually going to be, I think we're all talking about artificial intelligence and also, you know, being able to actually immerse yourself. We've all heard about Meta. Sorry, is that me? No. Hopefully not. The metaverse and so on. I think we're still, as hotels, a while apparently to go, but I'm very intrigued by that because it could mean that your guests can put on a pod and immerse themselves, you know, see your pool, see the bedroom before they arrive. So it's quite exciting, yeah.
And scary.
Yeah, but if you've got a great product, then we're able to show it.
It has to be really then next year about getting that product absolutely right and bringing your team on that journey and making sure that that happens, as well as obviously listening to the customer. So hopefully that answered for you. Probably time for one more question. Just this. Oh, sorry, there's one at the back, and then we'll.
The question was, what's the highest impact change that either you, David, or your members or clients have made in the last year?
So I missed that, sorry.
What's the highest impact change that you've made in the last year?
From a marketing change.
From a marketing perspective.
The biggest thing for us is as we've spoken about, which is realigning ourselves with what we do and making sure that we are still fit for purpose as a hotel, and then talking about that in the marketing. It's a simple thing to do. We did it with the restaurant, spoke to our guests and found out what it was that they wanted and realigned that product with their expectations. I've said it before, talk to your customers and get them to make the impact that you want.
Sorry, Kalindi.
Our hotels, I'd say I've really noticed a drop in OTA reliance, a huge drop. And hotels are investing more in their own websites and digital marketing, and hence able to not rely as much. I'm sorry if there are many OTAs in the audience today, apologies. But yeah, that's certainly something I've noticed.
Yeah, and I think the main one for me is making sure that a hotel has moved away from just a very generic description of what its vision was and what it was doing in the marketplace to something much more specific that they could actually own and they could then implement into everything they do. Because I find quite often hotels will just have the same descriptors, the same thought about what they exist to do. So when you define a really tight brand, that brand should be able to inform people how they should behave, how you should build your environments, how you should communicate, and the products and services you offer. And by defining that really tightly, you can make a massive difference.
Thank you. That was great answers. Just last question, just to this lady here.
Thank you. It's very inspiring and insightful. And I would like to understand a little bit more. When we talk about stand out based on the experience and the emotional collection, but how about sustainability? Because I haven't heard anything about sustainability, and I would really like to know how we can translate all the ESG, SDG stuff, like those seems to be more kind of like not so well known among our guests, or they might not know about like how the luxury hotel can maintain their luxurious, but at the same time driving the sustainability goals. So what's your perspective in this area? Thank you.
That is a massive question, which probably needs a whole other session. But I think it has to be a given that sustainability has to run through what the audience wants, what the planet needs, what we need as businesses. But I can only assume, I mean, David, you're just doing your planning and your budgeting. I would imagine ESG is right at the top of that strategy.
It's come to the fore for us like it never has before. And that's probably because as hotels, we do tend to kind of follow trends sometimes with a bit of a lag. But it's absolutely paramount, and it does then inform most decisions we are making as a hotel about what we do and where we source pieces from, and having a look at the whole supply chain. So yeah, it's massively important. But if I'm being honest, I feel like we've been dragged there rather than leading the way with this. And it is, you know, it's everybody's expectation. The classic thing not to do is obviously greenwash and pretend you're doing stuff you're not. And again, that comes back to authenticity. You know, say what you're doing. Make sure that people know that you are doing various. We're also not great, to interrupt myself, we're also not great at actually shouting about what we do in this field, because we feel like we're a little bit behind the...
And really, it's not about making us stand out. It's something we should be doing. Absolutely. Rather than using it as a marketing tool
Absolutely.
On its own. It's something we should be doing, that the customer wants, and we need to do. Now, with the luxury side, there's been lots of conversations without getting into too much detail about how much you can compromise between that. But it does work. I mean, we've got a hotel in the back that I know it does work for.
I don't worry about that so much. For me, I think it's about really, as you said, being authentic and being true, and really not feeling the pressure to communicate about it if that isn't something you actually do. So we, as at Pride of Britain Hotels, we've partnered with EarthCheck. A lot of our hotels are on that journey, and we can see that globally, that a lot of hotels in the luxury segment are making waves in sustainability. So I don't feel that the two don't come hand in hand. I just feel that the communication and marketing just needs to be real. If we're doing it, then we communicate about it, and if we are not, then we shouldn't feel like we have to.
Yeah. No, that's very good. Thank you for that question. I think we need to wrap up now, because that's been a fairly packed or digested marketing spiel from some great experts. And I think one thing I would hope for the next 12 months is that marketing is at the forefront of professionalism and investment from hotels, that whether it's internally or externally, that we focus that marketing is all about our product, it's about our audience, about the experiences that we provide. And as the panel all said, it's about listening and adapting and being agile, but we need to invest a lot more in our marketing as a focus and as a strategy. So thank you very much. Thank you to our amazing panel, and thank you to you for attending. Thank you very much, everybody.